Good evening and welcome. I trust that we've all done our civic duty and have gone to the polls today. When we talk about the American Revolution, we're reminded of the things for which our patriots fought, and the ability to elect our government leaders is one of them. Let us never take that lightly. There are some changes happening at the museum and quite a number of opportunities coming up. First, the Martha Franks exhibit is being consolidated into one area. So sad to see that complete exhibit go. I thought it was one of the best things we've done in a long time. But there are new things coming, new exhibits, and lots of exciting things. One is the antique quilt exhibit, June 22nd through August 31st. In addition to the exhibit, there will be workshops and lectures, a quilts of valor wrapping, a chance for the community to bring in their own quilts to display, and a quilt raffle. The museum is one of the stops for the Ag Art Tour. Lawrence County is on the tour June 29th and 30th. There will be artists here in the Magnolia Room on Saturday and Sunday. Durant will be presenting a lecture on historical agricultural practices on Saturday, June the 29th at 2 o'clock. If you can tell me more about that information. On Tuesday, June 25th, the museum is hosting Just Sharing. It's building community through stories of our past. A panel of scholars and historians from South Carolina will be speaking on several topics that will inspire our community to strengthen our collective trust and empathy. There will be a time to share thoughts and ask questions. The event is free to the public, and light refreshments will be served at 6:30 before the speakers begin at 7. As always, I encourage you to become a member of the museum. Membership dues are one of the ways we keep our doors open to the public with no admission charge, bring you interesting and informative programs and lectures, and develop quality exhibits. You may have noticed in the past that we sometimes have an issue with our sound, our audio. Like tonight, it's not the way we want it, and we have wires strung every which way, but we really have come up with a solution to that problem, to a lot of problems that will take care of the issues that we have. We're planning to work with a professional company and use professional equipment, but that comes at a hefty cost. And I can't wait to present this to our treasurer. She's probably going to pass out. But at the same time, we need it. Debbie and Chris and I stress every time there's a lecture or a program with all the things that we go through. You'll notice that Durant is going to be using this microphone because our other one, not a lavalier, it's a wireless microphone.
Madonna.
It's not working really well. And anyway, lots of things going on. So we really need to raise about $60,000. Once we'll be doing this over time. This company that we're working with is committed to letting us lease it, and at the end, leasing it or buying it for $1. And we will have their expertise at our fingertips for 5 years. So it's going to be a good thing. It's just that we need to raise the money for it. One of our wonderful, generous volunteers has offered a substantial amount to get us started. And he hopes that others will contribute to that fund. He's challenging us to a matching fund for that. So be looking out for that. It'll be coming. It sounds like a lot, but we figured after all the people that we've been talking to and thinking about piecemealing things, it will be so much better. And we will have technicians available to us. So welcome again, and I'll give it over to Durant.
Thank you, Teresa. I appreciate that.
Good to see everybody here tonight. One thing I would like to say, there's a couple things before I do get started. I would like to give my heartfelt thanks to the staff of the Lawrence County Museum, and especially sisters Teresa Noble and Debbie Hall, who are stalwarts of the museum. Not by themselves, by any means, because there's so many of you who are here tonight, many of you who are in the audience, that helped so much with this museum. And it's really growing, it's really strong. We've got the finest Native American artifact display in the upstate South. But I just wanted to give my thanks to everybody with the Lawrence County Museum. And I'd also like to mention that we have some historic plants here for sale. They are available. I'd like to point out these boxwoods here that are from the Rosemont Plantation. These boxwoods come from the boxwoods that were planted well over 230 years ago at the plantation right here in Lawrence County, planted by Louisa Cunningham, the mother of Anne Pamela Cunningham. We know Anne Pamela Cunningham had a loyalist colonel, was her grandfather. But he was immersed, he was able to stay in the county after the Revolutionary War, and his granddaughter is the one who started the Mount Vernon Ladies Association, which was able to raise $200,000 to buy Mount Vernon, and it was the first historic preservation project in the United States. These boxwoods here, the taller ones, were collected samples from the boxwood alleys that are still standing at Rosemont. Again, over 235 years old. And these boxwoods are 20 to 25 feet tall. The tallest one, the biggest one there, is one that we collected a couple of years ago. These smaller ones in the 3-gallon containers are ruby cuttings from the Rosemont boxwoods. They are true to the Rosemont boxwoods. And these are being sold, and it is as a fundraiser for the Rosemont Preservation Society. The 3-gallon are $50 a piece, and the 7-gallon there is $125. So if you want to historic boxwood and support a good cause at the same time, see us at the program. Well, I appreciate that, and that's the end of my spiels for tonight. And I do want to talk about the day that it Rained Militia. My lecture tonight is going to be based on this book by Micheal Scoggins, who is an excellent historian who is no longer with us. I highly recommend this book. And what we're going to be talking about tonight is the time period after Charleston fell. Oh, there was never a worse time than when Charleston fell, except for the Battle of Camden, which happened 3 months afterwards. But on May the 12th, 1780, Charleston capitulated. Of the 5,000 defenders in Charleston, 2,500 were Continental soldiers. They were sent to the prison ships in Charleston Harbor, where they had a miserable existence for the next several years. Many deaths on those prison ships. The militia, 2,500, which was in Charleston at that time, was offered parole and said that if they laid down their arms and went to their homes and accepted British protection and did not pick up their arms again in opposition to the British cause, they would be treated as neutrals. They would be left alone for the war or any aftermath. So a lot of people took them up on that cause. Now, those conditions got changed later, and it's a little bit later than the time period that we're talking about tonight. But there were numerous militiamen who were in opposition to giving their parole. And these militiamen coalesced after a while. But it's amazing how fast the state of South Carolina fell once Charleston fell. The British authorities immediately set up forts in Georgetown, Camden, 96, Augusta. A ring of forts, and then there were communication posts in between, like spokes on a wheel. And this happened within weeks. So it was overwhelming. It was very downtrodden time during this period. So that sort of sets the background for what happened next. So I had heard a thought or a quote last week that has kind of stuck with me, and it is a little bit blasphemous, I will say. But somebody said, God created wars so Americans could understand geography.
Oh my God.
And I believe that's pretty well true. And I know that I have really learned geography since I've been studying the Revolutionary War. And I want to talk about the geography of the area of discussion tonight. Now, y'all know that I emphasize the 96th district. We are in the 96th district. We're part of the 96th district, 10 western counties in the state of South Carolina. 100 battles here in the 96th district. So I could talk for time after time about the 96th district, but there was an interplay there. You know, the events that affected the people here did not just occur in the 96th district. There was bleed over into other areas, North Carolina, Georgia. Another one of those areas is this area right in here. Now, Cherokee, Union, and Newberry, these are part of the 96th district. This is the Broad River right here, which is the dividing line. So these other current counties, York, Chester, Fairfield, we're going to be talking about those quite a bit. This is Kershaw County, where Camden is, and then Lancaster here. These are really close to us, folks. I mean, in 2 hours you can go see drive to every different site that I'm going to be discussing tonight. So those are the present-day counties. Now, York County during the Revolutionary War time was referred to as the New Acquisition, and that's because the boundary between South and North Carolina was supposed to be the 35th parallel, which runs about through here. All of this was supposed to be North Carolina, but all of this was supposed to be South Carolina. So there was a court ruling in London in 1772 that said, well, we're going to keep this as North Carolina, but to compensate, we're going to give this area to South Carolina. And that's when this became the New Acquisition. And the militia from the New Acquisition was top of the line, folks. I'm telling you, they were top of the line. So, a little bit of history there. In 1763, the Catawbas were awarded this reservation because they helped the British colonial government during the French and Indian War. The Catawbas were in opposition to the Cherokees, and the Cherokees were pretty well wiped out. A lot of that had to do with help from the Catawbas, and that's what they were rewarded. So, with that, looking at this in a little bit of a greater perspective, the area we're talking about is right down in here. This is the Catawba River, the Catawba Indian Reservation. Just to look at the big picture, so to speak. Here is Hillsborough. This was the capital. This is where the governors were during the Revolutionary War when threatened on the coast. When Charleston fell, Governor John Rutledge of South Carolina made his way up to Hillsborough. And that's where he ran a government in exile for most of the rest of the war. Hillsborough was the westernmost district or county in North Carolina that had a courthouse. This was also the scene of the Regulators' War in North Carolina, at the Battle of Alamance in the 1760s. Hillsborough, Salisbury was they had 60 houses then, and Charlotte had 20. But Hillsborough, Salisbury, Charlotte, down to past Winnsboro to Camden. This right here was the best parts of the Great Wagon Road. That route I just described goes to Philadelphia. So that'll give you a little bit of an idea about where all of this occurred geography-wise. There was a lot that was going on. The British were actively recruiting now, and the Loyalists were coming out of the woodwork. And the Loyalists who had been run out of their homes for the past 2 or 3 years, that many of them had gone down to Florida. Then when Savannah fell, they were in Savannah. Now that Charleston has fallen, they're back in South Carolina. There's 2 Ranger groups from Georgia and South Carolina, 300 strong, Royalist cavalrymen who are in South Carolina. And they are giving pardons and paroles and bringing in the homesteads into the British fold. And they're congregating. And they are plundering. They are getting even with their patriot neighbors who had plundered them. So, turmoil, uncertainty. Some of the greatest military leaders in the first 5 years of the war, which is called the American period, they have given their parole. Andrew Williamson, the general of the patriot militia, senior to Marion, Sumter, and Pickens, he's the one who led the Cherokee War of 1776. He directed it. He gave his parole. He put down his rifle. Andrew Pickens, his second in command, put down his rifle. John Thomas Sr. put down his rifle. These are leading men of the Patriot Revolution in the backcountry of South Carolina, and they had given up resistance to the British camp. And the reason is their primary goal, safety and security in the backcountry of South Carolina. If the British could provide that now, they would lay down their arms. These men were leading men who had led the Cherokee War of 1776. They had virtually wiped out the Cherokees, which was a huge threat to them. And now there was security in the backcountry. They wanted prosperity. Without security, there is no prosperity. So one of the places where these loyalists were gathering was a place called Alexander's Old Field. It's right here. Now, I would like to mention that when Britain made those forts, Georgetown, Camden, 96, and Augusta, they also had satellite forts as well and communication posts between these forts. And the northernmost fort that they had was Rocky Mount, right here. This was a significant British outpost. And it had a sister fort of Hanging Rock. And there was an outpost of Rocky Mount, which was Brown's Crossroads. We will talk about that a little bit later. But the Loyalists had gathered a group of 200 men who had been plundering the Patriot. Some of them had been plundering the Patriot homesteads. And they gathered these men at Alexander's Old Field, which is right here in Chester County, and they were going to give them parole, bring them into the British fold. Well, several of the Patriot militiamen in the area were just furious over that, and they had some run-ins with the Loyalists who were trying to recruit them and this sort of thing. And one of the leading patriots was Captain John McClure. And he lived in this area. He gathered a force of 32 men. And he attacked the Loyalist gathering of 200 men at Alexander's Gold Field early in the morning of June the 6th, 3 weeks after Charleston falls. John McClure and 32 men are attacking 200 Loyalists at Alexander's Gold Field. And they run them off the field. They were totally surprised attack. But the Loyalists ran. Now there's absolutely conflicting reports on the casualties. Some say no casualties on either side. And that McClure was just trying to scare them, that sort of thing. Others say there were 10, 20 men killed, horses captured, and all this kind of stuff. But Alexander's Old Field, that is the first Patriot victory of any sort after Charleston fell. June the 6th, 1780. Now, Loyalist forces, Patriot forces were active all throughout this area. And one of the active Patriot forces was Thomas Brandon's camp. Thomas Brandon was the colonel of the 2nd Spartan Regiment, which was disbanded basically during this time. But he was coalescing. He was bringing some of his men together. And Thomas Brandon had been entrusted with powder. And he knew that there was a lot of Loyalists out in the area, and he was worried about his powder supply. So he sent 5 and 6 of his best men to hide the powder so that it wouldn't all be confiscated if something bad happened. And he started out with about 30 or 35 men, but after he sent his men on their way, he only had about 12 men in his camp. And also in his camp were Loyalist prisoners that they had captured. And they were going to take them up into North Carolina into the prison camps. And one of these prisoners was a fellow named Adam Steedman. And in the night of June the 8th, Adam Steedman escaped. And he went straight to the Loyalist commander in that area, who was a fellow by the name of William Cunningham. Sound familiar? Bloody Bill Cunningham, June the 8th, 1780. He's in Chester County, Union County, excuse me. He's in Union County getting knowledge that Thomas Brandon and 12 men, plus prisoners, exactly where their camp is, because Stephen knew where it was. So William Cunningham and his men attacked and killed about half the folks that were there and set the prisoners free. This is Brandon's defeat. Thomas Brandon, the colonel of the 2nd Spartan Regiment. This must be the only battle he ever lost. You did not mess with Thomas Brandon. He was a brawler of a fighter. He killed 3 men single-handedly at cow pens with a sword. So some of the best were there in Thomas Brandon's camp, including 16-year-old Thomas Young. And Thomas Young's older brother, 17, I think his name was Daniel, he was killed that night. And Thomas Young was furious. I told you, 16 years old in Brandon's camp. 2 years later, at the end of the Revolutionary War, Major Thomas Young, 18 years old. And he said he made a vow that night when his brother was killed. He said, for the death of my brother, the Tories 100 Tories will feel the weight of my arm. And he meant that. He was at Hammond's Old Store, he was at Kings Mountain, he was at cow pens. He meant that. And he did it. Another brother who was killed was the brother of Joseph McJunkin. And Joseph McJunkin ended the war as a major. He was at a young age. So Brandon's defeat had an impact. Bloody Bill Cunningham is in Union County defeating Thomas Brandon. That's remarkable. But also on the same day of June the 8th, 1780, there is an incident in Fairfield County here at Richard Wynn's plantation in Winsboro. So Richard Wynn was an incredible Revolutionary War leader. He was at Canebrake. He was in the Cherokee War of 1776. He fought with the South Carolina militia as we went on these Georgia expeditions, which turned out to be disastrous. We had 3 missions down there, all of them were unsuccessful. Richard Wynn, Fairfield County, South Carolina, he's with the South Carolina militia, fighting, doing his job the whole way down until he's on the absolute frontier border between Georgia and Florida. And Florida is British possession the whole time. Florida was a huge problem. Richard Wynn is in charge of Fort McIntosh on the Georgia-Florida border. And he's commanding 45 men. Wynn, that group, now this is 2 years before, this is 1778. That fort is surrounded by Loyalists and British regulars and Creek Indians. Who's with the Loyalists? Well, none other than William Campbell. He's confronting Richard Wynn at Fort McIntosh on the Satilla River. And the fort is besieged. Richard Wynn is able to negotiate a surrender and a truce. He will give up the fort with his 45 men if the British regulars would escort him to the adjoining sister fort, which was 40 or 60 miles away. And that was the conditions, because the Loyalist leaders there were Thomas Brown, William Cunningham, and Daniel McGurk, 3 cutthroats to the nth degree. And Thomas Brown had a reputation of turning prisoners over to the Creeks, and we all know what that means. Richard Wynn negotiated a truce whereby his men would leave, but they would be escorted by the British regulars. The British regulars would not slaughter them on the path. And so that's the way that they left. After the first night, the British regulars left, and they had to march 3 or 4 days through the jungles of Georgia and Florida before they found safety. But this is just one example of another of the accomplishments of Richard Wynn. And on June the 8th, at the time that Brandon's defeat was happening, defeated by Cunningham of the Little River Regiment, Richard Wynn's plantation gets burned to the ground. Everything. The wife has all her clothes, and they cut open the feather mattresses and all this kind of stuff. Just absolutely plundered. Burned him absolutely to the ground. And Micheal Scoggins makes one passing reference there when he says that Richard Wynn's plantation was burned by members of the Loyalist Little River Regiment. That's right here, folks. These people, your ancestors, those of you who are descended from Loyalists, and I know many of you are. The Little River Loyalist Regiment burned down Richard Wynn's plantation house, according to Micheal Scoggins, and I believe it. So that happened on June the 8th. And there's some conflicting and confusion among these exact dates, but now we're at June the 10th. And it's a very similar situation to what happened at Alexander's Old Fields. So again, there's a Loyalist gathering. And this time, these Loyalists have lots of plunder. They've got horses that they had taken from the patriot plantations. 400 men gathered together at Mobley's Meeting House here in Fairfield County. So John McClure, when he was successful at Alexander's Oldfield, you know, and then finally the British got together and they chased him, and he went away a little bit, but he gathered up with Richard Wynn. And this is at a place called Bullock's Meeting House, where the Patriots gathered together. John McClure, Richard Wynn, and William Bratton. These men were leading their militiamen in the field. And they had a strength of 200 men when they attacked the people at Mobley's meeting house. And again, 200 versus 400, and the Loyalists, again, were just absolutely defeated. And there's conflicting estimates whether there were any casualties or not. But anyway, all the horses and the slaves were recovered from that. So, and Richard Wynn led that, and he was with John McClure. So I've mentioned John McClure several times tonight. John McClure was at Cambridge. He was in the Cherokee War of 1776. He was at the Battle of Stono Ferry. He was a leading man. This is the first time I've talked about John McClure. Has anybody here heard of John McClure? No, you haven't. Why in the world? This is one little bit of a sad thing about Revolutionary War heroes, is the ones that we know the most, think the most of, revere the most, are the ones who survived the war. But John McClure did not survive the war. He died 3 weeks later at the Battle of Hanging Rock on October the 6th. August the 6th, 1780. So that's John McClure. And if nothing else, I've got to know John McClure from this book, and I hope you all get to know John McClure as well. So, on the 10th, the British leaders had enough of all that goings on in the back country. So they sent a retaliation mission under the leadership of a Pennsylvania Tory. And his name was Christian Huck. So I do want to talk a little bit about the command structure, how these different Army groups operated. Basically, on the Patriot side, you had the Patriot Militia, which were just homesteaders, farm boys. Now, by this time, they had 5 years of fighting together. These were well-tuned fighting men. But the militia would sign up for 30 and 60 days, or 90 days. And they fight about it, and then they go home. They wouldn't hold territory. So the Patriot side had militia, and they also had Continental soldiers who signed up for a year, were trained in the way of Army life, similar to how the British were trained. They wore the blue uniforms. They signed up for a year or 2 or 3. They would be drafted. They could be drafted in, and if they didn't want to go, they could pay a substitute or send a slave if that's what they wanted to do. But that's how the Patriot forces would line up, militia or Continentals. In the British system, they had British militia, which is the same local homesteaders like the Patriots had. And this was absolute civil war, and it was about 50-50 on the militia. And the British had the British regulars. People signed up for 30 years, signed up as a 16-year-old and served till they're 46 and all this kind of stuff. Those are the British regulars, and they were some of the most feared men in the world. But in addition to the regulars and the militia on the British side, they had what is referred to as provincials. Provincials. Provincials are Americans, recruited in America. They're trained in the British way of, and supplied in the British way fighting. They've got on the red uniforms. And the provincials are the ones that came down into South Carolina. Now, there were British regulars, but in the back country, they were primarily provincials. And as many times as I say tonight, British this and British that, in all of these actions and activities that I'm discussing tonight, there is no British involvement. There is no British soldier on the ground in anything that I'm talking about. When I'm talking about British tonight, I'm talking about the provincials. And Christian Huck was a captain in the provincials. And these provincials are primarily from New York, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey. So they're down here fighting under Huck. And Huck, I told you he was a Philadelphia lawyer. And he was a loyalist Philadelphia lawyer. And in Philadelphia, he was abused. They picked on him. They made fun of him. He didn't like that. He had a nasty attitude towards the patriot forces. And he brought that attitude down to South Carolina, where he behaved abominably. So, and one thing in particular, he was I want to say, he was either a Lutheran or an Anglican. Sorry to say that, but whatever he was, he hated Presbyterians. He did. And he referred to the Presbyterian meeting houses, they couldn't be called churches. The Presbyterian were meeting houses. So couldn't use the word church. He called that Presbyterian churches dens of iniquity. So he started on a retaliatory mission to Fishing Creek Presbyterian Church, which was, the reverend there was John Simpson. And John Simpson was with Wynn and these other patriots. I'm pretty sure he was at Mobley's meeting house, but he was, part of their army active. I believe his men came to church services carrying their rifles with them. Well, Christian Huck was on a mission to destroy Fishing Creek Presbyterian Church, and John Simpson as well. And he planned it so that he would get there on Sunday morning. But on his way to the church, he's plundering the plantations as he goes through, and he runs into the plantation of the Strong plantation. I don't know where Mr. Strong was at this particular time. There was an 18-year-old son who was fighting with the Patriot forces. He was in Sumter's camp, and Mrs. Strong was there, and there was a 16-year-old boy named William Strong. So different stories. One story says as Huck and his men are passing by the Strong plantation, William Strong is walking down the road holding his Bible, and they shoot him in the back and kill him, and there he is, and he stayed there for the rest of the day. The other story is a little bit more gruesome than that. And the reason I'm even repeating this is I want you to understand how gruesome it was back then. But the other story goes that William Strong was hiding in the barn. And they went in there and they found him and they shot him dead right then. And then they grabbed him by his ankles and drug him out to the front yard. And his mother's there in the front door. And they start chopping away at William Strong's body, 16 years old. And they're cutting him to pieces in front of his mother. And she could not stand it. And she went and she jumped on her dead son's body. And that was the only way she stopped that carnage. But this is the spirit of the times back then. So, I want you to know that. And so Christian Huck burned the Simpson home. He burned the church. He destroyed everything. Comes back to his
based at Brown's Crossroads. Then he gets orders that he is to attack Hill's Iron Works. Hill's Iron Works is here. It's the home place and the business of William Hill, Colonel William Hill, one of Sumter's colonels, one of Sumter's primary leaders. And he was one hell of a fighting man. He was a hero at Rocky Mount. Later, he lost his mind and everything and wrote some crazy stuff. And people believed it for 200 years. But anyway, primary source, it's a primary source, but it's wrong. Anyway, Hill's Iron Works was the most advanced industrial site in the back country, and probably in the state. They made iron piece equipment. They made cannons. They made swivel guns there. They made ammunition. They made cannonballs. But they made everything that you needed, horseshoes or whatever. Hill's Iron Works did that. And they had a huge iron foundry there where they were smelting iron, and they heated it up to 2,000 degrees. It ran out down the iron in the ground in little troughs they had. That's pig iron. And then they would supply the local blacksmith shops throughout the state with pig iron. So, and Hill, some of the patriots were organizing at his place for a while. That's where they camped, was at Hill's Iron Works. And Christian Huck was sent to destroy Hill's Iron Works. And he did that in June the 18th of 1780. So, all of this is going on. In North Carolina, what's going on, there is a fellow named John Moore, and he's organizing the Loyalists. And this is north of Charlotte in Lexington, North Carolina. John Moore is rallying, bringing together 1,000 Loyalists. And he's got them on this hill that's on the campus of Lexington High School. I just love that they have this high school right there where this major battle occurred. And this battle was significant. It's the Battle of Ramseur's Mill. So, John Moore's got these 1,000 Tories up there. Now, they weren't there to fight. They were there to organize. And perhaps half of them weren't even armed. I don't know. But in opposition to them was a patriot colonel named Francis Locke, L-O-C-K-E. And he had about 200 men. And Sumter was coming to join with him. And Sumter sent him a letter saying, hey, we're going to meet you at such and such place on the morning of June the 20th. But Francis Locke never got that letter. And so he went and he attacked those 1,000 Loyalists with his 200 men, and it was an overwhelming victory. It absolutely quelled Loyalist activity in the state of North Carolina, until Cornwallis came through after Cowpens. So the Battle of Ramseur's Mill, June the 20th. Now this is 5 weeks after Charleston. This was a significant victory. Cornwallis and them were kind of scratching their head over what's going on with all this. So it's just momentum after momentum, but the British forces want to quell that. And to do that, they're going to send an enforcer through the back country. This enforcer's name is Christian Huck. He don't care. He'll show them. So that's what's coming up next. Here's a timeline, of the different events as I'm describing them now. So I talked about how the militia, they fought for 30 days and so forth. You had a hard time getting the militia out in the fall when it's hard to season. And you had a hard time getting them out in the spring when it's planting season. And they didn't fight the rain. Nobody fought in the rain during the Revolutionary War because it was too, you wet your powder and you couldn't shoot. Nobody fought in the winter because the back roads were so bad you couldn't pass through them. So there were just a few times that they could fight. But one of the times when they really didn't like to do a lot of fighting was June. And we're talking about June. And the reason they didn't like to fight in June was because that was harvest time for your wheat crop. And Sumter let his men go so they could harvest their wheat. William Bratton, he was reaping his wheat. You know, you could use a swing blade, or you could get down your hands and knees with the reaping hook and just, cut those stands of wheat as you went. And we're going to see about reaping hooks here in a minute. So, Christian Huck got the word that William Bratton was at his home bringing in his wheat crop. And so Christian Huck decides to go right after Bratton because he really wants Bratton. He's one of the patriot leaders that he's got to do something with, do something about. So here is the area where Bratton's plantation is, right here. And this is the route that Christian Huck takes. It's the same route he took a month earlier when the strong boy was killed. And as Christian Huck is going towards the Bratton plantation, he's collecting prisoners. And as he's collecting those prisoners, he's looking at them and says, tomorrow morning at dawn, we're going to hang you. And he takes these prisoners with him as they come to William Bratton's house. Now, Miss Bratton has word that Huck is on the way. And one sort of desperate move she had was to send William Bratton's manservant named Watt. She gives him a note to take to William Bratton to warn him that Christian Huck is on the loose. Manservants during this time were loyal to their owners. The reason was they did not want their owner's plantation to get overrun. And if that happened, they were going to be snatched away. I told you about the slaves that were recovered at Bowman's meeting house. Those slaves are plunder. They're the most valuable property in the state. And once they are taken by an opposing army, they have no idea what their fate is going to be from there. They'll never see their family again. Never. And who knows what their fate is going to be thereafter. So you will find case after case of manservants being loyal to their owners. And one of those manservants is Watt here, as we can see Martha Bratton handing him a note for William Bratton. Well, soon enough, here comes Christian Huck. And this is the scene that happened on William Bratton's front porch. This picture comes from Harper's Weekly magazine about in the 1870s. I'm not exactly sure when this was done. But this is national news, or a national story. And it is the story of a red-headed Irishman named Henry who is demanding that Martha Bratton give the location of her husband, lest she have her head cut off with a reaping hook, which he's holding to her neck. When at the last moment, Lieutenant Adamson comes up the steps. There he is. And he knocks Henry's arm loose as he's about to slice Martha Bratton's head off. And Lieutenant Adamson is the savior of Martha Bratton. Lieutenant Adamson was a loyalist from Camden. And he joined the British forces. He was wavering. I mean, he was loyal. He had lots of patriot friends. And the word is that he joined the loyalist forces because he knew of the retribution that was getting ready to come down. And he felt like he could ameliorate that if he worked with the British side. And here he is saving Martha Bratton's life. Now, I will tell you this. I'm going to tell you about the battle here in a minute. But at the very end of the battle, Lieutenant Adamson was one of the wounded on the field. And he was wounded so bad, he had a saber slash right across his face. And huge blood pools everywhere. And he was just a mess, and he was unrecognizable. And after the battle was over, William Bratton was informed incorrectly that that fellow right there was the one that held the reaping hook to your wife. And so William Bratton's going up, and he's going to get immediate retribution. And Lieutenant Adamson says, please interview your wife. Please talk to her. And so Bratton called. He said, lest you make a mistake you're going to regret for the rest of your life. So William Bratton stopped, and he went and he got Martha Bratton. And she walked up, and he said, do you know who this man is? And she said, I've never seen him before. Nobody ever looked like that. And he said, please, Miss Bratton, tell him about it. And as soon as she heard his voice, she knew. So Lieutenant Adamson saved Martha Bratton's life. Martha Bratton returned the favor, and she saved Lieutenant Adamson's life as well. Well, you know, these armies lived off the land. It was so important to foraging. You know, they would go to the mills, they would attack the mills. Christian Huck has taken over the Bratton plantation. And he's, wanting to spend the night there. And he's wanting to hang the prisoners the next morning. But he finds out that there's a field of oats just a few miles down the road. A field of oats. He's got hungry horses. He's going to give his horses a treat. So he doesn't stay at the Bratton plantation that night. He goes down to the Williamson farm and turns his horses loose in their oat field. And the horses just as happy as can be eating those oats. And then he settles in for the night. He puts the prisoners in a corn crib and puts a guard on them. And he sends 4 sentries out to cover the 4 points that any enemy may approach. Well, William Bratton gets the note from Watt, and he brings 80 to 100 men with him to his plantation. And he finds out that Huck has left and is now down at the Williamson farm. And William Bratton knows just what to do. And he divides his force so that his men can come in from those various 4 points onto the Williamson plantation. And they go through and they come upon the first sentry. And he's asleep. And they walk right past him. They leave one person there saying, when he wakes up, I want you to shoot him dead. So that fellow guarded him. And there was men coming in from the other 4 areas. And soon enough, a sentry spots him and fires a rifle shot. And as soon as he does that, then all 4 sentries are killed in turn. And the rush is on, and the militia comes and attacks Christian Huck's provincial forces at dawn. And here you can see, this is a picture by Don Troiani, the premier Revolutionary War artist and Civil War as well in America. The #1 guy. He thinks so much of Huck's defeat that he's drawing paintings about it. And this is pretty well accurate. And he paid tremendous attention to detail. And if you ever want to wonder how the militia was dressed or the provincials were dressed, he follows these uniforms to a T. But I believe my favorite guy in this picture right here is this one right here, in his Continental uniform. He's a Continental. All these other guys are militia. Now, very likely, he served 3 years in the Continental Army, and he's out now. But when the fighting is heating up, there he is, right there with them. So, I just like the fact that he thought it was a good idea to put on his uniform because he's getting ready to get back into it again all over again. Christian Huck and his men were decimated in this battle. Christian Huck was killed here. And this battle will forever be known as Huck's defeat. And what's so absolutely remarkable about this is that it is the first time in South Carolina that militia defeated provincials. Now there's first after this, and first after that, this, that, and other. The Huck's defeat was the first time that militia defeated the provincials. And Huck's defeat has gotten so much honor, acclaim. You know, you got Harper's Weekly doing stories on it. And you got artists painting Huck. I mean, Watt. And Martha Bratton. I mean, it's just a very moving story, the tale of Huck's defeat. And this happened on July the 12th, 1780, 2 months after Charleston fell. But it wasn't the only thing that was going on in South Carolina in July, even though this was a glorious victory. There were also glorious victories going on in our neighboring county of Spartanburg. And here is a description of 5 battles that were fought in Spartanburg in 4 days that pushed British lines back 40 miles. So while Huck's defeat was going on, the Battle of Cedar Spring was going on too. The next day, the Battle of Fort Gallo. The next day, the Battle of Earl's Ford. Then Shiloh Church. Then Fort Prince. One right after another. Small battles. Does Don Troy Annie draw pictures of these? Maybe we can talk him into it. So, here is a comparison. And this is fairly accurate because Spartan County, I mean, it's right next to Union. This scale is probably, somewhat appropriate. And I am going to go over these battles. But I told you about how Thomas Brandon was given power to, use as he did saw fit. But also, John Thomas Sr. was given power to restore. And John Thomas Sr. was the colonel and the founder of the 1st Spartan Regiment. Thomas Brandon was, that regiment was split up in 1778, and Thomas Brandon was the colonel of the 2nd Spartan Regiment. John Thomas Sr. is colonel of the 1st Spartan Regiment. So, he's stored now. Half the people you talk to say John Thomas Sr. gave his parole with Andrew Pickens and Andrew Williamson and Leroy Hammond, all those Indian fighters. And John Thomas Sr. was an Indian fighter to the nth degree. So whether he gave his parole or not, he was captured for storing powder on his property. And he was captured and he was sent to jail in 96. And while he's down there, his wife is there with him as a helper. And this is what they did back then. I'm sure that the wife was feeding him, giving him his food. She was washing his clothes. One day she was down at the village creek washing clothes, and she heard two Tory women over talking. And those women were describing a raid that was going to take place later that day, leaving the 96 and going up to a patriot encampment at Cedar Spring. Well, when John Thomas Sr. was captured, the leadership of the 1st Spartan Regiment went to his son, John Thomas Jr., who was an extremely capable leader. So John Thomas Jr. now has about 60 men at Cedar Spring, and they're camped out. They're staying away from British authorities as best they can. Jane Black Thomas has word that that camp is going to be attacked that night. So she jumps on a horse in 96, and some stories say that she stole this horse. And she rode 60 miles. She is 60 years old. And she rides 60 miles to Cedar Springs. There's the spring right there. This is the Bible field. This is Cedar Springs Baptist Church. But you can see this is an artesian spring. And this is where John Thomas Jr. was camped. And his mother got into camp at dusk. And she told him that right behind her there's a Tory raiding party on the way. So John Thomas, he built up the fires, the campfires, to make him think that everybody was, settled down for the night. And then he took his men and he put them in the surrounding woods. And at midnight, a force of 50 or 60 Tories charged into that camp, expecting to find sleeping patriots that they could bayonet to death in their sleep. And they charge into the clearing there, and they're illuminated by the campfires. And as soon as that happens, John Thomas Jr. gives the order to fire. They blast the volley, and half of those men are killed or wounded. And the other half run away as fast as they can. And where they run to is right here, Fort Gowan, a fort that was built for Indian protection. So there are about 20 or 30 Tories now that have run up to Fort Gowan. Fort Gowan sits up here. This is Buddy Williams. He's absolutely sure that this is where Fort Gowan was. There hasn't been any archaeological work there that I know of. Leading Spartanburg historians say that yes, this is where Fort Gowan was. So those 20 or 30 Tories go into the fort. Well, as they're there, all of a sudden, 20 or 30 patriots come on the scene. And these are patriots from Georgia who were going up to join with Charles McDowell's camp, which I'm going to talk about next. So the Tories and the Georgians are there, and the Tories are like, who are you for? Who are you with? We're King's men. Oh, brother, come on in, let's have supper together. And they told them all about what happened at Cedar Springs and everything, and they were just having one fine time. And so then they went down to bed. And when they went to sleep, the Georgians arose at that time and captured all those fellas, killed one of them, took all their horses and supplies and everything. And this was a big factor that, was beneficial as far as this victory was concerned. This was at Fort Gowan, which is here. So after the victory at Fort Gowan, the Patriots knew that Charles McDowell had a camp here on the North Carolina, South Carolina border. Now, I talked to you about Sumter's men, what happened over in York, Fairfield, Chester County. Sumter had his camp in the Catawba Indian Reservation. But there was also a camp at the North and South Carolina border on the North Packwood River. And this is at Earl's Ford. This is the battlefield at Earl's Ford. A local archaeologist, he's retired now, Wayne Roberts, is the one who absolutely located this battlefield with the artifacts that he recovered here. But Charles McDowell had 300 men camped right here. The Georgians came into camp, and they were welcomed. Well, this Fort Prince was the biggest fort that was in Spartanburg County. And it had 300 men. It had 300 loyalists were stationed at Fort Prince. And they are there while the Battle of Cedar Springs goes on, and while the affair at Fort Gowan goes on. And they find out that there's loyalists, patriots from Georgia coming through the back country. They have no idea about Charles McDowell's camp here. And it's only 25 miles away. That's how communication went. Charles McDowell just came into camp that day, that night, but he had a group of patriots that were, roaming the back country of North Carolina and everything, living off the land, and now they're down here in on the Spartanburg County, South Carolina, North Carolina line. So he's got his men there. The Loyalists are going to send another enforcer, James Dunlop. James Dunlop was involved in more punitive actions on the part of the Tories than almost anybody else. And James Dunlop takes about 30 or 40 men, his best horsemen. He is going to chastise those Georgians who had the audacity to take over the Loyalists at Fort Gowan. So he comes up and he comes upon the camp. Now, Charles McDowell, he did a lot of great things. He did a few things not so great, and he did something not so great at Earl's Ford. So he sent out a scouting party to look for, any enemies coming his way. So he did that. He was supposed to do that. Well, that scouting party, they got lost. And they never came back and told McDowell, there's enemies out there or not. So he just assumed, well, they'll come back tomorrow. And everything's okay, and he and everybody else was dead. In the middle of the night, here comes James Dunlop and his British provincials, along with Ambrose Mills. Ambrose Mills from Tryon, North Carolina. So Ambrose Mills and his men, and James Dunlop and his men, come upon Earl's Ford, McDowell's camp, sleeping men. And as he sees men sleeping on the ground, James Dunlop has his bayonet, and he pokes one of them, and he says, "What's your name?" And the fellow says, "Hampton." Well, Hamptons were all patrons, and Dunlop knew this, and he knew that he didn't like the Hamptons. And so he stabs that Hampton right through. And who he stabbed right through was 16-year-old Noah Hampton. And his friend sleeping beside him, he was stabbed as well. He was killed. Then McDowell's camp arose, and Dunlop and his men had no idea that there was 300 men over there. So they, run back, and they formed a defensive line. And Charles McDowell and his men charge that line. And as they do, Dunlop lets you do a volley, and they're just wiped out at that point. So that's what happened at Earl's Ford. The next morning, the men of the camp realized that Dunlop had been chasing them. So now it's their turn to chase Dunlop. And Dunlop takes off, and there's a running gunfight through Spartanburg County. And they go to Shiloh Church. This is where Edward Hampton and his men catch up with James Dunlop. 8 of Dunlop's men are killed at this point. Then they finally go to Prince's Fort. And this is where the 300 British men were established. And as soon as Hampton and his men got inside of that fort, they knew they couldn't go any further. But the commander at Fort Prince, Alexander Ennis, he knew he could not hold Spartanburg County any longer, so he retreated. And from these 5 battles in 4 days, all of a sudden, this area right here was never again in British possession. So I did want to emphasize how important it was to recognize those 5 battles in 4 days in Spartanburg County that happened at the same time that the Battle of Hutch Defeat happened. And I hope one day Don Troyani will draw a picture, a painting of what did occur in Spartan County during that time. Does anybody have any questions? I think we covered everything. Yeah.
Where did they get their order?
They got their order. It was laying on the ground, on top of the ground. Yes, Kings Mountain, and this is close to Kings Mountain. The east face of Kings Mountain was covered in iron ore. I can show you iron ore here in Lawrence County. In any rock that you pick up that's heavy and got rust on it, that's iron ore. And you could literally pick it up off the top of the ground. They had wagons leading from Kings Mountain, taking it to these iron smelters. I mean, you could dig it out of the ground, but and the reason you don't see as much of it now as you used to is because they picked it all up. And the other advantage of that particular location is also it's the only deposit that I'm aware of in South Carolina that has limestone. And lime was an important part of the smelting process. I don't ask you too much more about it. But the slag formed when they added lime to this 2,000-degree furnace that they had built.
It's out the opposite.
Right. They had big bellows, that were pumping air in. Yes.
At Hutch Defeat, what happened to the gunpowder in the end? What happened to the gunpowder?
Yes, well, the Patriots kept it.
They just kept it.
In 1879, there was a transport ship going to Savannah, or 1779. There was a transport ship going to Savannah, the Philippa, and it was captured by Georgia and South Carolina privateers. And on that ship was 13 tons of gunpowder. So they took that gunpowder, and the Georgia militia got 5 tons of it. And they sent another 5 tons up to Valley Forge and gave it to George Washington. And 3 tons of that gunpowder went to the state of South Carolina. And Governor Rutledge sent 1 ton of that into the back country of South Carolina to John Thomas Sr. and to Thomas Brandon. and other leaders here in the backcountry.
I heard a story that Martha Bragg had ignited in Sumter.
Oh, now that's a different story.
Is that different?
That happened before, yes.
Oh, that wasn't.
Now this is with William Bratton. William Bratton had powder too.
But she blew.
And her soldiers were coming up, and she knew they were coming, so she lit a cask or something like that, and she led a trail of gunpowder to the cask or where she pointed it. And as the soldiers came through, she lit it. The thing blew up.
Okay, that is something she
Yeah.
did also.
But I don't think she suffered any retribution for that.
Yeah, no. Okay.
Well, I appreciate all y'all's interest and attention, and we may or may not have gone over tonight, but there's a lot to cover there.